I said earlier in one of the chats that my wife was better in emotional confrontation than I was. She understood it better. And on one occasion, excuse me, she came up with what she called the intimacy experiment. And the intimacy experiment was a way to get two people, a couple, to sit and facing each other, looking basically in their eyes, and only using the words sad, angry, scared, happy, excited, tender. So I'm recalling one time she was working with a couple, and I'll call them Sam, and the woman was Eileen. They were married. Sam had been married twice before. Eileen had been married 4 times before. And so Dixie, my analyst wife, sat them down and had them just say these words: sad, angry, scared, happy, excited, tender. That's the only words that they could use. Now, my wife's goal was to move them to tenderness, to be able to be loving and cherishing with one another. So she hoped one would say tender and the other would say tender. But I'm remembering this session with Sam and Eileen, and here's the way it went. She said scared, he said scared. She said sad, he said sad. Now right now both of them are in the here and now. It's scary to do some new experiment with therapists like Dixie that you don't know exactly what's going to happen. Scare does come out of the moment when you don't have sufficient information and you're just launched into something. And then one of them said sad, the other one said sad. Then Eileen said she was scared. And all of a sudden, Sam said angry. She said scared. Now she still is in the moment because we're watching very meticulous details of every muscle, every gesture. And we can see that she's in the moment. However, Sam is not in the moment. And we don't know exactly what's going on with him. And then she says scared, he says angry again. Then she says scared, and suddenly he says happy. But we can see this is not a here and now happy. Something is going on, and it has to do with script. So he said happy again. When she says scared, and all of a sudden she erupted with fury. And she said, "You're like all men." She was furious. The argument started. He called her a bitch. She called him a bastard. And my wife, the analyst, had to intervene. She said, "Let's slow it down. Let's go back to the specific emotion and see what happened to you in your minds." And so she would say, "What did you feel, Sam, when you said happy?" And he says, "I was happy." She says, "Well, how old did you feel when you said?" He said, "I was like a little boy in the home I grew up in." And so she said, "What happened in that home?" Now, what I'm doing right now is showing you an abstract of all psychotherapy, because this is the pursuit that you go in terms of emotions. Now, she had, and I had, as I watched her, particularly in these intimacy experiments. And one reason I watched her is because she had trapped me into doing it one time. And I found myself crying and telling her how much I love her. So much for my personal story. We're trying to learn in this entire lesson, and this is the 4th fireside chat, of what is this basic fear of human beings. Why won't they just move to loving each other, to tenderness, to care, to cherishing? What stops them? And as we pursued Sam, it was very clear that he was back in the roles of his script, where his father was a mean man who would beat his mother, and so he had the strong role of the father who is muscular and beats the hell out of his wife and some of the kids. And then he saw the weak role of his mother, who just had to take it because she couldn't leave. She didn't have a way to survive without her husband. And then he saw his role, which was being very smart. So here's strong, weak adaptation. But when he switched to Eileen, he was switching to the role of his father. He wanted to be in the strong role, where by God, these women may be weak and say they are scared, but I'm not scared. I'll beat the hell out of somebody who would say I'm scared. And so he gets into that role. Now Eileen, who's been married 4 times previously, is now in her 5th marriage. She's seen men do this before. And so she makes a generalization. You're like every other man I've ever met. You just love it when a woman hurts. And then they began their argument. Now Eileen, of course, also had a script. So what we were investigating was how there was script lock, clamps in a lock. And as long as they tighten it down day after day, week after week, in terms of their marriage, Eileen's headed for her 5th divorce, and Sam is headed for his 3rd, because it's a get nowhere. I might say that Eileen was very attractive, and yet one characteristic of her, left over from her before age 6 situation, was she had a father who would scream, and she was scared of loud noises. So one thing that was characteristic of Eileen is that her body was always turned toward an exit. You could just see it in the way she wanted to know how to get the hell out of Dodge if she had to. And so when Sam, happy, and then called her a bitch, she jumps up and get ready to run off until my wife stops her. And then we have to decipher exactly what went on in this script lock. So what are the sachet options? Well, we know that sachet leads us to understand and dip into where people are hurting, and that's why we use these sad, angry, scared, happy, excited, tender. And we also know if we can get people to move to where they're real, then they will add tenderness, excitement with the other, happiness with the other, that's right here and now. We also are explaining things. So we're trying to build up the ego, the centered self, on that diagram that I went over early, the functional diagram, when I talked about Freud and Eric Berne. So we are also providing a nurturing situation where the people are safe to look at this. We're not going to be in the strong role or treatment bad. And then we're treating humans bad. And so we're also presenting alternatives. Like, what each of you want is tenderness. But that leaves you vulnerable. And so you're very scared of it. And so just sit here for a while and say, I love you. And then you say, I love you. And you say, I feel tender in my heart when I think of you. And you say that. So my wife would lead them in what they would say. And you could see both of them would be tensing up. She wanted to run. He wanted to go off into intellectual toots in order to avoid tenderness. So this is what we would do. as we would introduce. I want to say one other thing, and that is you can't have one of them move over into tenderness and love and consideration and kindness in the moment, and the other one still be in script. So what we had to do was develop a contract. We knew that the one who was still loving was very vulnerable, and they could be treated very badly. So we'd say, you know, that your lovingness is dumb if the other one's going to stay in script. So we would have both of them, if we could, over time, commit that they would be living, celebrating life, continually growing mentally and I guess spiritually from their soul, and that they would be active in promoting the love. Otherwise, if only one person got what we were saying, they were very vulnerable. So that's conclusion of 3-5 on intimacy and the problem of abandonment.